Hello, baby.
So what we have here is more than one geologic feature created by the flood. We have folded strata, compressed because the plates of the earth were moving away from the mid-Atlantic ridges. And then, as this material was heavier and had larger granule size, it was laid down first. And as it was compressed, the fast-moving water laid down the lighter, smaller granule size material on top of it.
I think you missed the point somewhat. We're not talking about the deposition of the sediment here. We're talking about the fact that the rocks below are very deformed and the sediments that lie directly above them are wholly undeformed. And incidentally, the line of contact shows that the rocks that are deformed have been eroded. You seem to be suggesting that the layers below were being rapidly compressed in the flood, while simultaneously sediment was being laid down on top that somehow or another was unaffected by the compression.
In case you don't understand how strata are formed, they're formed because the heavier material settles first and the lighter material forms on top of it. See, you evolutionists are stuck with a conundrum, and that is that geology doesn't support your wacky ideas.
So your idea is that the sedimentary rock history of the Earth is one entirely of the coarser sediments being at the base and then upwardly fining because it was all deposited in the flood. Have you ever looked at any rocks in your life? Nephews, I've gotten more familiar with your work. Sometimes you just simply leave me slack-jawed at the astounding ignorance that you bring to bear. I mean, most of the things I tell you aren't even sophisticated in geology. There's something that a student would learn in an introductory class to geology. Get out of that chair, look at some rocks. And here's a graphic showing the rocks of the Grand Canyon. And these rocks represent a wide variety of sedimentary environments, and in a number of cases you have sediments that are coarser sitting on top of sediments that are finer. For instance, the continental sandstone has much coarser grains than, say, the Hermit Shale. You go to Zion Canyon, you see the same kind of thing. Go anywhere, and the stratigraphy is far more complicated than you seem to imagine.
Uniformitarianism does state what you say, but it also states inadvertently that the processes going on in the earth today have been happening about the same rate that they have been in the past.
No, it doesn't. Where do you get this shit? Volcanism's been more intense or less intense at other times in the past. Plate tectonics has functioned at different rates in the past. Sea level obviously has varied greatly. Climate has varied greatly. Let me give you a simple example of what I'm talking about. This is a map of large igneous provinces, or lips. What those are massive basalt deposits, huge volume basalt flows. They poured out of fissures at various locations at various times in the past, and they were long-lasting events. For instance, the Siberian traps lasted for over 1 million years. They're so huge they've been associated with mass extinctions, like the mass extinction near the end of the Triassic, the mass extinction at the end of the Permian, and the mass extinction at the end of the Cretaceous. Presently, there are no active large igneous provinces operating today. That's what I mean by volcanism has operated at different levels in the past. And that's true of many natural processes.
Did you know that there are coal deposits on the ocean floors? That's right.
Coal on the bottom of the ocean. That's fascinating, hon. Mind giving us a reference? Because you see, I think I'm fairly knowledgeable, and I don't know of any vast coal deposits on the bottom of the ocean.
Well, yeah, I'll do that because I know evolutionists just ask creationists for things, and they, don't want to study anything. They just, I don't believe that unless you show me, because I don't want to look nothing up. But just for fun, look at this.
That's great, Neff. You're a natural-born comedian. Trouble is, all your jokes actually are unintentional, but you don't know it. Before we start with your rendition of references, you are taking into account that I excluded continental margins, right?
This is from geology courses at the University of Georgia. Alabama there. See? And look what they say here. Separation of the continents attributed to the biblical deluge. You got to keep this under a lid now. Quiet, okay?
Neff, looking at that, it looks like it has to do with a presentation of early ideas about earth science. And in such a presentation, it would be reasonable to mention flood myths.
Here's an article by World Mining Exploration who says there's enough coal under the Pacific Ocean to keep every house in NSW for 13,000 years.
Neff, I can't read that, but I suspect what it actually says is that there's enough coal in the Pacific Basin region to supply coal. And I base that on statistics like this. You see, there's a lot of coal in China, Indonesia, there's some in Australia, some in New Zealand. Not so much in Japan, and I know you mentioned that later in your video. But it's not under the water, hon. At least not most of it. What is under the water is in the aforementioned continental margin that I specifically excluded from my comment.
And look here, Springer Link, that's a peer-reviewed journal. Completion of the first large-scale seafloor mine by BGP.
I looked that up. I'm not exactly sure what they're trying to accomplish there because mining coal on the continents is relatively cheap, so I can't imagine that's economically feasible. But more importantly, that's in the continental margin area that I specifically excluded from my comment. At this point, I'm getting the distinct impression you have no idea what a continental margin is.
And in a book by McGraw-Hill called The Seafloor and Its Sediments. And let's see here where they talk about it. Now this is secret stuff. Coal deposits on the seafloor are mined when coal is present in sufficient quantities to make the operation worthwhile. In Japan, undersea coal deposits are reached by shaft and stretched under the sea.
So you do have no idea what a continental margin is. Let me explain. They're part of the continent, and sometimes they're a little below sea level, sometimes they're a little above. When they're a little above, they're still very flat-lying and low-lying areas that form lots of big swamps, that grow lots of vegetation, that, as we know, produce coal. Now, this is what I was talking about with ocean basins. There's not much carbon in the ocean basins. It's mostly calcareous ooze and clay. The areas in yellow and white are the continental margins that I was talking about. And as I say, those are parts of continents. They just happen to be currently a little below sea level. I specifically excluded those in my initial comment. You disingenuously included them. So I guess you've ingloriously failed again, Nephi. Any final words?
I just feel like I need a shower all of a sudden.